everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. Now, back in 2005, Thomas F. Hines wrote the book The Vanishing Proofs of Evolution, a book where it went over all of the various so-called evidences of evolution that were touted in the past as being definitive proof of evolution being true, that turned out to be total and utter hoaxes. Well, today we'll be adding to this collection in real time as we take down an evolutionist myth in today's video. Specifically, we're taking down the evolutionist myth that there is a 1% difference between the genome of a human being and the genome of a chimp. Now, let's see what the standard narrative is. If you go to Google, which you see right here on screen, and you type in, how similar is a chimp's genome to humans? The AI overview says, the chimpanzee genome is remarkably similar to the human genome, with an estimated 98.77% of nucleotides being identical between the two species. When comparing the DNA sequences that can be directly compared, the similarity is around 99% according to the Broad Institute. Even when considering DNA insertions and deletions, humans and chimpanzees share about 96% sequence identity, according to the Broad Institute. So, according to the AI overview, the similarity between the genome of chimps and the genome of human beings is anywhere from 1% to 4%, depending upon whether or not you want to consider DNA insertions and deletions. But the standard number that people go with is either 99% or 98.8%. And as we are about to see, this narrative being communicated to us by the AI overview of Google is wrongo bongo. An article has been floating around social media recently, which is why I came across it, from Evolution News and Science Today. An article titled, Fact Check, New Complete Chimp Genome Shows 14.9% Difference from Human Genome. And I'm just going to start reading through the article, and then it's going to lead into some interesting rabbit holes. The article reads, a groundbreaking paper in Nature reports the complete sequencing of ape genomes, including the genomes for chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, Borneo orangutans, Sumatran orangutans, and siamangs. I noted this in an article here yesterday reporting that an evolutionary icon, the famous 1% difference between the human and chimp genomes touted across the breadth of popular and other scientific writing and teaching, has fallen. The researchers, for whatever reason, I'm not a mind reader, chose to bury that remarkable finding in technical jargon in their supplementary data section. Now for more on the scientific details. You might be thinking, hey, weren't these genomes sequenced long ago? The answer is yes, but also no. Yes, we had sequenced genomes from these species in the past, but as the paper explains, owing to the repetitive nature of ape genomes, complete assemblies have not been achieved. Current references lack sequence resolution of some of the most dynamic genomic regions, including regions corresponding to lineage-specific gene families. Or, as an accompanying explainer article puts it, in the past, scientists had deciphered segments of non-human apes' genomes, but they had never managed to assemble a complete sequence for any species. In the current study, however, Makova and her collaborators used advanced sequencing techniques and algorithms that allowed them to read long segments of DNA and assemble them into a sequence that stretched from one end of each chromosome to the other without any gaps. This has never been done before, says Makova. In other words, the complete ape genomes were never fully sequenced, and they used the human genome as a reference sequence, which made the ape genomes look more human-like than they actually were. You don't believe me? From the technical paper. Most previous genome-wide comparative studies of apes had been limited by the mapping of inferior assemblies to a higher quality human genome. Consequently, human reference biases were introduced. This is consistent with what the National Center for Biotechnology Information said in 2007 about an early draft of the chimp genome. Contigs were assembled using the human genome as a guide and are therefore humanized in their construction. This is an important distinction as some sequences, such as insertions, deletions, and gene duplications, may not be accurately represented by the current chimpanzee assembly. Thus, up until now, most versions of the chimp and other ape genomes were effectively humanized because they were assembled using the human genome as a guide. This effectively makes them appear more similar to the human genome than they truly are. Can these new drafts of ape genomes help fix the problem? Another explainer article in Nature seems to suggest that these complete drafts of the ape genomes will prove that they are less similar to the human genome than has been claimed. Shortly after the first human genome sequence was finalized in 2003, a chimpanzee assembly was released. This was followed by assemblies for other great apes such as the gorilla, Sumatran orangutan, and bonobo, and small apes that are less closely related to humans than our great apes. These genomes offered a valuable opportunity to catalog the genetic differences that have accumulated during the evolution of apes, including changes that are unique to humans. But because these initial releases were incomplete drafts, comparisons could be made only between properly resolved portions of the genome. These studies, therefore, focused only on the relatively small differences and excluded extremely repetitive sequences and large-scale structural differences such as inversions and duplications of genomic sequences. That last sentence seems to hint that previous comparisons between human and ape genomes only focused on relatively small differences and excluded the sections that entail large-scale structural differences. The explainer article notes that this study has fully sequenced the genomes of 6 living ape species, enabling long-awaited comparisons of hard-to-assemble genomic regions. Thus, one could expect that these newly complete ape genomes would reveal much greater differences compared to the human genome. Now this is where things get fun. What's odd is that as one reads the technical paper, a direct comparison between the ape and the human genomes is hard to find. This passage seems to be as close as it gets. Overall, sequence comparisons among the complete ape genomes revealed greater divergence than previously estimated. Indeed, 12.5 to 27.3% of an ape genome failed to align or was inconsistent with a simple one-to-one alignment, thereby introducing gaps. And in case you guys do not believe that the Nature article in question says what is quoted right there about the 12.5 to 27.3% difference, well, let's go to the actual Nature article, which you can see here on screen. It was published on my birthday this year. Oh boy, what a birthday gift this was. And you scroll down a little bit, and at the beginning of the section called Divergence and Selection, we read, overall, sequence comparisons among the complete ape genomes revealed greater divergence than previously estimated. Indeed, 12.5 to 27.3% of an ape genome failed to align or was inconsistent with a simple one-to-one alignment, thereby introducing gaps. So, Evolution News accurately quoted that part of the article. But it gets more interesting. What exactly does this mean? Well, first they admit that sequence comparisons among the complete ape genomes revealed greater divergence than previously estimated. But the technical Nature paper considers human beings to be an ape, so implicit in this statement is their belief that comparing ape genomes includes comparisons between human and ape, i.e. non-human hominid genomes. So for the rest of this article, I'll call humans humans and I'll refer to non-human hominids as apes, just like most normal people do. Interestingly, 2 reprints of the paper, version 1 and 2, published last year on bioRxiv, which are presumably the versions of the manuscripts submitted to Nature initially and after one round of revisions, preface this result with these 2 sentences. The oft-quoted statistic of 99% sequence identity between chimpanzee and human holds for most of the genome when considering single nucleotide variants. However, comparisons of T2T genomes suggest a much more nuanced estimate. T2T means examining telomere to telomere, i.e. examining the entire chromosomes throughout the genome. These sentences were evidently removed during revisions for the published version in Nature. An interesting editorial decision. So what is the paper saying about the difference between humans and chimpanzees? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. When the authors of this study, this article, were talking about how there's a 12.5 to 27.3% difference between ape genomes and human genomes, they were saying that in the context of referring to the current narrative of people saying that there's a 99% similarity, only a 1% difference between chimpanzee and human genomes. They were actually challenging and contradicting that narrative. And in case you do not believe that the original two versions of the article said this, here is version number 1 on BioRxiv. It's right here on the screen. It was posted on July 31st, 2024. And when you scroll down into this article, we see Section 2, Resource Improvement Highlights, Sequence Divergence. The oft-quoted statistic of 99% sequence identity between chimpanzee and human holds for most of the genome when considering single nucleotide variants, SNVs. However, comparisons of T to T genomes suggest a much more nuanced estimate. Examining the distribution of one MBP-aligned windows shows that the tail of that distribution is much longer, with 12.5 to 27.3% of the genome failing to align or inconsistent with a simple one-to-one alignment, especially within centromeres, telomeres, acrocentric regions, and SDs. So yes, that 12.5 to 27.3% difference between the human genome and other ape genomes, that was in reference to the oft-quoted statistic of there being 99% sequence identity between chimpanzee and human genomes. And if you go to version 2 of the article, it says the same exact thing. Now, the question we have to ask at this point is, why, oh why, would Nature magazine cut out the first 2 sentences of this section, which talks about how this 12.5 to 27.3% difference between the genomes of humans and apes is in the context of the current narrative of there being only 1% difference between human and ape genomes? Why would they cut that out? There's actually a pretty simple answer to that, ladies and gentlemen. It's called censorship. It's called religious devotion. Atheists and evolutionists will not allow any part of the evolution paradigm of history to be questioned or proven wrong. Because if you can prove that one part of the evolution paradigm of history is wrong, well, that opens the door to disproving the whole rest of it, and then the whole house of cards will fall apart because people will begin to realize how many lies the house of evolution and billions of years is built upon. That's why they cut out these first 2 sentences from this section. Because if you read the version that published, it just basically says that there's a 12.5 to 27.3% difference between the human genomes and the ape genomes, but it doesn't specify if that's in relation to the general consensus of there being only a 1% difference between human and chimp genomes. But as we can see from the original 2 versions of this article, it was in that context because they brought it up. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically the authors of this article said, yeah, the current narrative is that there's only a 1% difference between chimpanzee and human genomes, but what we found in our study is that there's actually somewhere between a 12.5 and 27.3% difference between human genomes and ape genomes. And Nature magazine said, nope, we're not going to allow those first 2 sentences. We can't allow people to know what the context was of that 12.5 to 27.3% difference. If you're watching this video and you're tempted to think that I'm just a kooky conspiracy theorist because I suggested that the atheists and evolutionists who control publications like Nature magazine would be willing to censor inconvenient truths about the similarities or differences between the genomes of apes and humans in order to advance the evolution narrative, If you think that's a kooky, outlandish conspiracy theory, well, I got news for you. I got a nice stack of books here that document censorship of Christians and creationists by atheists, evolutionists, and secular people in all kinds of academic settings. We got the original Slaughter of the Dissidents. We got Silencing the Darwin Skeptics. And we have Censoring the Darwin Skeptics. You read all three of these books and you will see that censorship of creationism and Christians in order to defend the evolution narrative, the evolution paradigm of history, it's been going on since long before censorship was cool. It's been going on longer than I've been alive. I'm going to read the next 2 paragraphs and then we're going to call it good here. As we'll see, the statement above that sequence comparisons among the complete ape genomes reveal greater divergence than previously estimated is true, but it doesn't reveal the extent of the differences between human and ape genomes that this study uncovered, so let me cut to the chase. Look back at those numbers, 12.5 to 27.3%. The same numbers show up again buried deep in the supplemental data where they compare various ape to human genomes. They're findable if you know where to look, but should I say buried or hidden? From what I can tell, the supplemental data reports that the ape genome that is most similar to the human genome is the chimpanzee genome, and it shows a 12.5% gap divergence, i.e. difference, from the human genome. And when you look at the gap divergence, where the human genome is the target and the chimp is the query, the difference is 13.3%. Let me be clear. According to this study, the human and chimp genomes aren't 98.8% the same or 1.2% different, as for instance the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History claims. In fact, they are no more than 87.5% similar, i.e. the human and chimp genomes are at least 12.5% different, if not 13.3% different. In fact, the 13.3% difference is more relevant since this reflects how similar the whole human being assembly is to the chimp genome. And with that, guys, another evolution myth goes down, chopped down in its prime. The idea that there's only a 1% or 1.2% difference between the human genome and chimpanzee genome is a complete and utter myth now, thanks to this new study. We saw Nature magazine engage in censorship of that information, but thankfully the authors were wise enough to put out the earlier versions of their article on the internet well in advance of this final version from Nature magazine. And because they did that, we now know the truth about the human genome and the chimp genome's differences. It's not a 1% difference. It is at best a 12.5% difference, possibly worse. And now that we have one evolution myth down, I'm looking forward to the future where we can see another evolution myth get taken down live and in color, and I will be there to report on that when it happens. And with that, I bid you guys adieu, farewell, and I will see you in the next video.